Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. We will start our meeting with an invocation, which we observe by moment of silence, and then follow that with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Agent,
Here.
Clegg,
Here.
Halliburton,
Here.
Sanchez, Willits,
Here.
Woodings,
Here.
5 present, 1 absent.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
we caught a little error in the minutes approved on March 15th, and I'd like to move to amend the vote result for Resolution 172-22 to reflect that Councilmember Halliburton voted yes for the resolution and Councilmember Bajent voted no, and then to subsequently amend the March 15th, 2022 council meeting minutes to reflect that vote result.
And I'll gladly second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Woodings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez, Willits. Yes. All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. And next up, we'll go for a request for approval for the council minutes from April 5th, both the work session and evening meeting.
Madam Mayor, I move approval of the council minutes from April 5th, both the regular meeting, work session and regular evening meeting.
Second. We have a motion, and a second. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Woodings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Willits. Yes. All in favor, motion carries.
Great. Well, next up, we have special business. And first, we have the appointment of Rob Perez to the CCDC board for a 5-year term ending April 2027. Rob's here with us this evening. Appreciate your willingness to serve. That I'll put the nomination before the council.
Madam Mayor, happy to make this nomination. I've known Rob for a long time, and I know his knowledge of the issues that CCDC handles will be great. With that, I ask unanimous consent to appoint Rob Perez to the CCDC board for a 5-year term ending April 2027.
Without objection. Thanks. Well, Rob, you're welcome to say something if you'd like. You can tell me you don't want to also, but since you're here, I want to give you that chance.
Well, thank you. Not necessary. Thank you for your vote of confidence. I've seen the wonderful things CCDC have done over the years, so I consider it an honor to be able to perpetuate that legacy.
Thank you very much. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
And next, we have the reappointment of Llewellyn Maroney to the Historic Preservation Commission for a 3-year term that will end in April 2025.
Madam Mayor, I ask unanimous consent for the reappointment of Llewellyn Maroney to the Historic Preservation Commission for a 3-year term ending April 2025, and thank her for her previous and willingness to continue to serve.
Well, Jillian. Okay. I too appreciate her willingness to be reappointed for a second term, or I guess it's a partial term. And so without objection, Jillian, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And now we have interim budget changes with Eric. Come on up.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the council. We have 10 interim budget changes before you this afternoon, all of which are revenue neutral in fiscal year 2022. The first item is a project to add funding for public safety lighting enhancements. This project would be funded through a rebate that was received by the city through or by Idaho Power. And that rebate was made available due to the city installing LED lights throughout the streetlight system. The second item is for sewer trunk and lateral extensions That project will be funded through reductions to 3 other projects that have funding available. The third item is for the procurement of security endpoint protection. This software would protect city computer devices, desktops, laptops, and servers from cybersecurity threats. The funding source for this particular project would be from the portfolio fund, the project portfolio fund that was established and approved by the City Council as part of the fiscal year 2022 adopted budget. I'll note that on this particular project, there is approximately $93,000 in ongoing costs, which would be built into the upcoming fiscal year 23 proposed budget. The next item is for the purchase of a project and portfolio management tool. This particular project would also be funded through the portfolio fund established and approved as part of the FY22 adopted budget. This tool would allow for the implementation of a new industry standard project and portfolio management software be used across the entire city. This particular project also would have an ongoing impact of $100,000, which would be built into the fiscal year 23 proposed budget. The next item is allocation of funding that has been made available to the city through Home ARP or American Rescue Plan funding. This funding source would be used for the production and preservation of affordable housing and for supportive services for households experiencing homelessness. The next item is for COVID-related homeless services. These funds would be available through a FEMA grant for non-congregate shelter at hotels and associated supportive services. The next 3 items, all related to the airport road improvement project, security gate and fence project, and economy lot expansion project, all would be funded through reductions to other airport capital projects. The last item is actually a reduction and a closeout of a project. That's for the Active Directory file scanner project. That project was completed, came in $10,000 under budget, which would be restored to the capital fund balance. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions the council might have.
Madam Mayor. Eric, just real quickly, as we build this next year's budget, we're entering a time where we have a fair amount of ongoing costs for especially cybersecurity and other software maintenance needs. I think for transparency purposes, we should know what that cost is altogether at some point, just so folks can understand how hard it is to make sure that we do have good cybersecurity. Given the recent event at VRT, I think it's a really important thing, and I would just like to make sure everyone understands how much we're investing in it.
Thank you, Council President. And as we go through the budget process, I can be sure to make a note of that and bring that back as a package.
Thank you. With that, Madam Mayor, I would move approval of the interim budget changes for April 12th, 2022 as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Woodings. Yes. Bajent.
Yes.
Clegg.
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
Willetts. Yes. All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. Next up, we have the consent agenda. All items with an asterisk are considered to be routine by the council and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the general order of business and considered in its normal sequence.
Madam Mayor, I move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Woodings. Yes. Bajent.
Yes.
Clegg.
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
Willetts. All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. We will now move to ordinances. We do have one on first reading.
Madam Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that all ordinances on first reading be read by number and title only and filed for the second reading calendar.
Without objection.
ORD 18-22 and ordinance CAR 21-00031 for property located at 2801 West Palouse Street, amending zoning classifications of the city of Boise City to change the classification of real property particularly described in section 1 of this ordinance and adjacent rights of way from R-1C single family residential to R-2D DA medium density residential with design review with a development agreement, setting forth a reasoned statement in support of such zone change and providing an effective date.
Thank you. We'll now move on to new business. First, we have a subdivision, SOS 22-4. We have Sabrina Mortensen from the city presenting. And then the applicant, TO Engineers, Alec Agarola. Oh, great. Thanks for being here with us this evening. And then we don't expect the Neighborhood Association of Record Pierce Park to be with us, but please, anyone here in the room for that? All right, let us know if you're here online. And otherwise, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, Sabrina.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. The item before you is a request to vacate a plat note and public utilities easement for lots 7 and 8 of the Janelle Place subdivision on 0.32 acres located at 4811 North Pierce Park Lane in an R2 zone. Janelle Place subdivision, recorded in 1994, includes a plat note which designates Lot 8 as a common lot for emergency vehicle access, which is to be owned and maintained by the Janelle Place Homeowners Association. This note specifies that no obstructions, parking, or non-emergency access is allowed within the limits of Lot 8. The entirety of Lot 8 is also covered by a public utilities easement, and there is a separate 10-foot wide easement along the northern property of Lot 7. The applicant desires to consolidate lots 7 and 8 into a single parcel in order to develop the property. The applicant requests to vacate plat note 7, shown on this slide, in order to allow non-emergency access to the site. No structures are proposed within the boundaries of Lot 8, and the existing emergency vehicle access and blanket utilities easement on the lot will remain. Comments from the fire department indicate that they can support the applicant's proposal as long as no parking is allowed within the access drive. This requirement will be included as a condition of approval with the associated planned unit development application, which is currently under review. The applicant also requests to vacate the 10-foot wide public utilities easement on Lot 7, and all affected agencies and utility providers have submitted written approval of the requested vacation. The planning team recommends approval of the request, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Any questions? All right. Well, we've got no questions on this for our staff. Alec, you're welcome to join us. And if you have anything more to add, you let us know. Otherwise, it looks as though you're all right with the terms and conditions of the staff report. All right, the record will reflect that. I'll see if anyone is anybody online for this?
Madam Mayor, no one has their hand raised for this item.
Okay, we'll go ahead and close this hearing in the matters before council. Thank you, Alec.
Madam Mayor, I move approval of SOS 22-4 for 4811 North Pierce Park Lane, vacation of plat note and public utilities easement.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Any discussion?
Madam Mayor, I just note that this is a great location for some additional housing. It's very near the State Street corridor, which has good public transit, and also very near some schools. So really excited to see this.
Great. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Woodings. Yes. Bajent.
Yes.
Clegg.
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
Willetts.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. And next up, we'll move into the public hearing for tonight, the Boise Districting Commission Ordinance. Hannah Brass-Greer is here to present. Just as she's getting set up, I want to thank Council President Pro Tem Holly Woodings for your leadership on this and your interest in ensuring that we've got a commission process and a process for the public to engage on the drawing of our districts. Now, we really wanted to do this last time around, but because the legislation came so late, the city quickly worked on districts, and this tonight provides the opportunity to have a commission that will then hear from the public and work on drawing maps for our future districts, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Hannah Brass-Greer, Director of Strategic Initiatives, back with you tonight to go over.
Can you pull the mic a little closer, maybe?
Yes.
Thanks.
Better?
Yes.
Okay, to go over updates to the districting ordinance. I'm just going to review the background we went over last time to give folks a sense of where we've been and why we're here today. In 2020, the legislature passed a bill that required cities with 100,000 residents or more to elect council members by district. And from that time through the 21 session, there were efforts to enact clarifying legislation to develop a more detailed process, and those efforts were not successful, which is why we had that short timeline to develop our map for the 2021 election. And moving from at-large to districted elections, in 2021, our odd seats were up for two-year term elections. And then next cycle in 23, those seats will be up again for four-year terms with the even seats up for two. And then in 2025, we'll be back on track for every 2 years for regular four-year terms. So I'm just going to go over the basics of the updates here in the ordinance for you tonight. Now that we have had more time, as Madam Mayor said, we're trying to develop a more permanent process moving forward. We've also worked with our neighboring cities, Meridian and Nampa, that are also required to do this districting. And so just as they're proposing to do, this ordinance establishes the Boise Districting Committee. The commission would be appointed by the mayor and approved by council, as we do for our other boards and commissions in the city. The commissioners can't have run for Boise City Council for the past 5 years prior to service on the commission, or run 5 years after their service, just to ensure independence of the commission. And the commissioners, there would be 5 total, coming 1 from each of the combined areas in this comprehensive plan. This map comes from Blueprint Boise. You can see here the way these have been combined in the proposal: Northwest and Foothills, the North and East ends with downtown, West Bench and Central Bench, Barber Valley and Southeast, and Southwest and Airport. This is also similar to the process that Meridian and Nampa are putting into place by giving some geographic guidelines to how we appoint commissioners. And I just want to clarify, I know there's been some confusion. This map is not the district map. That will be drawn by the commission itself. This is simply to ensure geographic diversity on the commission.
And Hannah, I've got a question.
Sure.
You probably went through this when we talked about this in work session, but so other commissions that we have, we appoint them and then they have terms for 5 years. This commission has one job to do, right? I mean, they're not a standing committee for 10 years, are they? But they are here to draw the maps with this data, and then 10 years from now, a new council and mayor will use this ordinance to appoint a commission after that census?
Correct, Madam Mayor. So these commissioners are in place to draw a single map. Once that map is approved, the commission is dissolved, and then next time it's needed, a new commission is convened.
Great, thanks.
And so the basic framework for duties and process are also set out in the ordinance. As we just discussed, every 10 years with new federal census data, the commission would be appointed to develop a new districting plan or update the plan. They would assign council districts and numbers 1 through 6, and again, act independently of anyone who's currently serving on council or is candidate for council. And then just the basic process, again, the ordinance is really just the framework for this. And so it touches on the commission getting support and working with staff and expert consultants to develop the districting plan. The ordinance requires at least 1 public hearing of the commission itself during the process while they're developing maps. And then once 3 commissioners have approved a final plan, that plan would come in front of City Council for consideration, another public hearing, public input, and then once that is approved, it would be adopted by ordinance.
Madam Mayor? Yeah. Just your question got me thinking, and so now I have another one. The commission also updates the districts based on changes in the city boundaries or annexations. But I understood from the ordinance that they also kind of automatically dissolve upon, return of their commission report. So how does is it something we need to fix? Like, how does the dissolved committee then engage in the updates over that 10-year interim period?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council Member. It would be a new commission. So if 2 years after we do this, there's an annexation or a change in boundary, we would need to convene a new commission to do that.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So once, as I said, once that plan comes to council, council adopts it through ordinance. And then in addition to the draft that you have before you tonight, in the coming weeks, we will develop the Boise Districting Commission policy that will accompany this ordinance. And that really is to give more detailed guidance both to the commission and to the public on how we'll manage through this process. So it will have additional details about staff and commission support, staff and consultant support to the commission as they do this work. How the public can participate in that process through the required at least one public hearing, likely more from the commission, but also through written comments and citizen proposed maps or plans through that commission process. And then the requirements of what those plans look like. So the minimum requirements of substantially equal population, and then keeping together neighborhood associations, communities of interest, and election precincts as much as possible. And if they can't, for some reason, those would be flagged in any proposal. And those would be both for proposals that the commission develops itself, as well as those proposals that come from the community. And then just next steps and timeline. Obviously, we're here before you today with the draft ordinance. Going through that over the next few weeks. Assuming approval through May and June, we would work on appointments and approvals of those commissioners so that they could begin their work and really work through the summer and fall to gather information, work with staff and consultants, take public input and public map proposals to then by October, November, come up with their final plan that would then go to council and hopefully be approved by the very end of the year at the latest. Certainly it could be a shorter process, but this is how we've had it laid out so that we're done by the end of the year. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, take any feedback you've got.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Hannah, thanks for your work on this. This is, hard things to do, and we're trying to find, public balance and to make sure that there's lots of input on this. I had a couple of questions, and I'll just start with one. I understand the logic in not allowing anyone who's on the commission to then run for a seat within these districts. What I don't understand is the backdating and denying those who have run for city council with no idea that they would be then banned from being part of this commission. Talk me through that.
Sure, Madam Mayor and Council Member. The idea behind this, again, is just to maintain an independent citizen commission. And so for those who have run in the past 5 years may have a stake depending on the outcome of the districting. And so the guidance was to both sort of do the back 5 years, but not, we're only talking 5 years, not this. And this generally will happen on a 10-year basis, except for possible changes in boundary. So you will have the opportunity in a fairly short order to be able to be considered for commission, and then certainly the moving forward 5 years after serving.
A follow-up. Can we legally do that? Is that possible to do the backward ban, if you will?
Madam Mayor and Council Member, I haven't asked that question specifically, though legal worked with us on this and we didn't flag it, but it's certainly something we could double check.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. So a couple of questions. The state does this by commission, but I understand that they don't have any geographic requirements for their commissioners. Is that correct?
Madam Mayor and Council President, that's correct. They're partisan. It's a partisan process. So their requirements are 3 from the minority party and 3 from the majority party, and that's how they manage it. They don't have geographic requirements,
Okay.
though Meridian and Nampa are planning to do so.
And since we're nonpartisan, that doesn't come into it, but we are going beyond their process in a way by requiring the geographic.
Correct.
So second question, remind me how counties do their redistricting.
Madam Mayor and Council President, I don't know off the top of my head,
Okay.
but I can get that information for you.
I asked that question because I'm not aware of any counties that use a commission process. And my understanding is that they draw their own maps and then they put them out for public comment and pass them, but just wondered if you knew that. Thank you.
All right.
I have another question, Madam Mayor.
Sure. Just a second. Were you?
No, I'm just going to
Okay.
close it up.
Go ahead.
So I know that you've done, Madam Mayor, I know that you've done a lot of research on this and taking best practices from other folks and also, other cities that are grappling with this. Talk to me a little bit, and Elaine, Councilmember Clegg touched on this. In the state process, you have to have 3 and 3, and it has to be bipartisan because you have to have 4. Right. So it forces bipartisanship. I know here what we're trying to do is make sure that geographic areas are represented. Talk to me about why not 6 or 5 with a chair that's non-voting. Can you give me a little background on your thoughts about why we didn't do 6 so that you made sure that you had that extra, like that you had at least have a majority, and or why we didn't do a chair that was non-voting?
Madam Mayor and Council Member, we landed on 5, 1, because you would have to have a majority, you'd have to have 3 of the 5. And we didn't want to have a huge commission. We didn't want to have too many people. We know from the state experience that at times it's actually difficult to appoint commissioners. And so we didn't want to have it too big. And in order to have a vote, an actual outcome and not a tie, we landed on the 5. But with your point in mind that we would have to have that majority vote.
And one more. When you were looking at the geographic diversity, did you take into account the population of each of those swaps of land, if you will, those districts, commission districts?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Willetts, we looked at that, though that they are not even, admittedly so. They are not the council districts. Obviously,
Right.
that's where we're required to and want to have as equal as possible districts. Here, we simply wanted a way to look at the city. The blueprint Boise map already exists to be able to say, okay, we want these 5 people to come from diverse parts of the city. And that was a way that was already established and that our staff and our GIS staff knew how to do, so that we could say to the mayor, here are the general guidelines. We want a geographically diverse commission, and this is how we can get there.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. That brings up another question for me. I appreciate Councilmember Willett's question, but it would seem to me that if you had the same number of commissioners as you have districts, that it would create at least some notion, especially if they're geographically diverse and from equally populated geographic areas, that they'd be protecting the area that they came from. And it seems to me much better to have a different number than the number of districts you have, and to frankly ensure that while they're geographically diverse, that it's not likely they'd line up with district areas, because we don't want them to have a bias about where the district should be. Am I thinking correctly about that?
Madam Mayor and Council President, yes, in order to for the 5-year, looking back and forward, and also for the geographic diversity that is not attached to the districts itself, it just adds to the independence of the commission.
Thank you.
Well, Madam Mayor, before we move into public hearing on this, I just have a couple of comments. I want to thank Hannah and Amanda and our legal staff for working through this ordinance process. It was really important to me that we create a districting commission that is independent, that is geographically diverse, that represents our whole city, and that we establish a process, unlike other jurisdictions, that really creates that trust and that opportunity for public process in creating our districts. So I think that we have a good start, as Councilmember Willett's pointed out, and several folks from the community reached out as well. Those geographic areas that we're seeking our commissioners from are not, as published, are not equal. So I do have a kind of proposed change to that will kind of equalize those areas a little bit, consolidate some, and then give a little bit of allowance for some larger population planning areas to have their own space. So we'll be talking about that a little bit later, but before I propose anything, I want to hear from the public, see what folks have to say, and then we can have further conversation. So I appreciate everyone reaching out, being involved, and if you're interested in serving on this commission, I encourage you to apply to do so.
Thank you. And with that, we'll open the public hearing. We're going to hear from people in the room first, and then we'll go to Zoom. So first, we've got Wayne Ritchie.
Right here.
Yep, welcome.
Mayor McLean, City Council. How's everybody been? I'll try not to screw it up too bad.
It's nice to see you in person. Welcome back.
About a year ago, you guys came up with what everyone considers the most gerrymandered set of districts anyone has ever seen. You managed to split, all 5 of you all consider yourself probably in the same neighborhood, North End. You managed to split that neighborhood in half. Okay, that's gerrymandering. Meanwhile, people that live on Horseshoe Bend Road and Table Rock, they're all one district. Okay, I think everyone's biggest concern is that might happen again. I'm sure all 5 of you would like to be on the ballot next year as city councilman. But, and that's why I think half the people are here tonight. And I realized that last year you were in a rush, but nobody that would draw a map would split your districts in half in the North End. And I think it really leaves a really bad taste in everybody's mouth. Everybody's, upset with that. Did everybody see my video? No? Well, I sent it to most of you. But I think that's everybody's concern. You gerrymandered the living daylights out of the districts last time, and we don't want to see it again. That's all. Questions?
Yeah, no question. Apology. I laughed when you said the gerrymandering thing at the very beginning, and that was not appropriate for me to do so. I don't see things the same way because we do have 4 city council members who are in the same district. And so if it was truly gerrymandered, what you would have seen is people not in the same district. And so really there were 4 that could have been split up, and every single thing was, in my opinion, done geographically. Anyway, so that was where my context was coming from. I laughed a little bit. It was inappropriate, and I just want to apologize.
Okay.
That wasn't a question, though.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right,
Good to
thank
see you. Karen Danley.
Good evening. I'm Karen Danley, 8441 West Hill Road, Boise, Idaho. First of all, I want to thank you for a better process than 2021, where there was 3 public hearings in one evening and no public input or testimony allowed. However, I do have serious concerns about the legality and fairness of this districting ordinance. Number 1, the lack of fair and equal representation. The district committees, the districting committees districts vary from 29,000 citizens to 120,000 citizens. This clearly does not represent fair and equal representation. One district is 400% larger than another. The goal of municipal electoral districts is fair and equal representation throughout the entire city, which is the foundation of government. Starting off the district committee with drastic inequalities sows distrust. Second, it disqualifies people in retrospect. There should not be any requirement for the districting committee that is in retroactive. You are applying a retroactive requirement to politically active people who acted in good faith to serve their community without any knowledge that this would be a consequence. In the United States Constitution, Article 1, it explicitly forbids ex post facto laws where consequences for actions that were not a penalty at the time that you cannot be held responsible for them. For example, if someone pulls a dandelion weed and later is considered a protective plant protected by the law, you cannot be arrested retroactively, for example. The article specifically speaks to crime. However, the principle applies. The principle behind the prohibition of ex post facto laws is firmly enshrined in American law and practice. I've studied municipal and legislative districting committees. I've consistently seen the prohibition of future committee members running for opportunities in the future, but never have seen this retrospective law. 3, standing commission, there's no definition of term. Overreaching and longstanding, every districting committee I've seen is disbanded explicitly. 4, the districting committee should not be chosen by the mayor nor city council. City council should not be involved in the districting committee. The council is also to improve the districting map, and that is a conflict of interest as well. Any city elected official with any role in the appointment of commissioners or of the approval of maps should be prohibited from running for office for the next 5 years and hold themselves responsible as the committee members. In conclusion, throw away the map and neighborhood association and allow the neighborhood associations to presidents to elect the commission. This will represent citizens throughout the entire city. It also keeps it out of the hands of those who are affected by the districts. It is simply not good government by putting people in positions of authority that affect their own districts. The practice of putting elected officials over the appointed districting committee invites distrust, encourages and questions motives. I suggest you go to the leaders who are closest to the Boise citizens, that would be the neighborhood
Karen.
association presidents.
Your time's up.
Okay, I understand the city is new to this. Thank you for your effort. I strongly suggest a complete wholesale rewrite. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Madam Mayor, Karen,
Yes.
have you ever gone to Eddy County and protested their process?
No, that's not my concern right now. It's not my
Thank you.
focus.
Next, we have Michael. I'm not sure if it's Aberg or Aberg. Aberg, great, welcome.
Madam Mayor, City Council, this is my first time doing this. Do I have to say my address?
No, we've got it for the record.
Okay, perfect. I share many of the same concerns that everyone else, I'm sure, will bring up. I appreciate hearing some of the back and forth that you guys have had on this. I think that this is a good first start. Geographical representation is a good idea for sure. But I think that kind of limits the talent pool a little bit. So we should kind of be looking for expertise rather than potentially locational interests. But if we're moving forward with this process, as has been noted, there's 120,000 people in one district, 25,000 in another one. So given that we need only a simple majority of 3 out of the 5 commissioners, a worst case scenario, that simple majority could disregard the 2 commissioners that have 60% of the representation of the city's population. And as we see the city grow and change over time, I think that some of these geographical limitations are going to kind of limit the ability of the city in order to kind of change that representation over time. Now, moving forward with potential solutions, maybe, is there any reason that it has to stay at 5 other than Council President Clegg has mentioned? It seems like we could have as many commissioners as we want or as we need, given the current population or anything else. Another suggestion would be to merge some of the smaller population districts, namely the Northwest Boise foothills, as well as the North and East ends. That would make it the biggest district. However, that would free up one of the other commissioners in order to break up the bench. We get the West Bench and the Central Bench. That's all I got.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I've got a question.
Yeah.
So do I. Go ahead.
Maybe it's the same question. So my question is, if we combine some of the districts, like you said, or if we evened up the population.
I'm just going to ask that we clarify, it's planning areas, it's not
Planning areas.
districts.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
we're not drawing districts tonight.
Very, very good point. Thank you. If we combine the populations and then there wasn't geographical representation, would you find that problematic as well? So if you combine that area, you might have a really, really large planning area where one person might be on the very far east end. And then you've got a whole nother side, maybe a west side that doesn't feel like they have representation because that district was combined, or because that planning area was combined. I'm going to get that right by the end of the night.
I think that's part of the problem with using the foothills as a planning district, because that spans the whole thing anyway. And that's a very geographically wide, but used as a single district already, or single planning area already. So, well.
Madam Mayor, Mr. Aber, you brought up something that I've been thinking about a lot. Like, I happen to believe that where a person lives just is not relevant to what they have to offer, period. And I know there are different points of view on that, and that's fair. But you'd mentioned a comment. Part of your comments included reference to looking to the qualifications, or looking to, and this is what I'm thinking about. We're talking so much about geographic representation, population representation, but what are the actual qualifications that you'd like to see? Because without something along those lines, we're just kind of stuck with raw numbers of people and where they live.
I'm not exactly familiar with the qualifications involved with drawing districts, but whatever those qualifications would be, I would think that should be the bar to cross instead of just where you live.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now we've got Colin Nash. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I submitted some written testimony to you, so I'd appreciate if you have the opportunity to review that. I won't go into every detail of that tonight. I do first just want to offer a little bit of defense for the retroactive ban on running for city council. I think if city council members are excluding themselves from the process, that it's appropriate that their political opponents also be excluded from that process. And I think if you have an opportunity to review that with your attorney will probably tell you that there's no due process interest in a public office, either serving on the commission or the city council. So I think the legal review that will find that it's in good order. Regarding the written testimony that I submitted, I just want to say I'm very much in support of this. And I think those folks that have worked on this have obviously done their due diligence on what an independent redistricting commission should look like. You don't have to look very far in Idaho to see how municipal redistricting is used to protect incumbency or partisan interests. And I'm hopeful that this process would root that out. I do have some technical suggestions for the ordinance that you'll see in my written testimony. The first is under the draft ordinance, the city council only has the right to remand the plan back to the redistricting commission if it violates state law. I think that should also include a violation of the ordinance. So if there's some process issues, that there's some recourse that city council has. Additionally, I think in no uncertain terms, it should state that you have to rely exclusively on the census data. What we saw at the state level is that a lot of people were lobbying to consider undercounts or overcounts in specific areas. That's inappropriate. You don't want the commission going down those rabbit holes. So I would encourage you to include that. And finally, I just want to hit on a few things that I think will probably be taken up in policy, but I think are meaningful enough that they should be considered in the ordinance. And that is the inclusion of criteria for preserving local communities of interest in traditional neighborhoods. This is criteria that you'll find in almost any state's redistricting plan, redistricting criteria, including the state of Idaho's. Currently under the statute, there is only two criteria that are required, and it's the equal population and the other one's escaping me right now. But I think adding one would be appropriate to encourage the commission to preserve local communities of interest, which can be just about anything. And I offer a much longer defense of that in my written testimony. And finally, I know this is another one that's included in policy proposal, but there should be language in the ordinance that says that the commission can accept and consider publicly submitted maps to encourage public input in that process. So that concludes my testimony, and I appreciate the work that's gone into this, and I think this is a good step forward for the city.
I've just got a clarifying question. You mentioned the statute having two requirements. One was population, the other you couldn't remember.
Yes.
But did you mean the state statute that directed us for what we did, what we're doing, or do you mean the
Okay, here's
ordinance
the-
is written tonight?
Yeah, good question. So it's both. The two criteria are one, to the nearest extent possible equal population, and the second one is contiguous precincts.
That's right.
So,
And that's in state statute
mhm.
related to our,
And then your
new
staff, your
districting.
ordinance only that adds no criteria for the plans other than those.
okay, all right. Thanks. Thank you.
Mayor?
Yeah.
Colin, quick question about the communities of interest. As I looked at the maps as we were working to figure out how to create them in the hurried state we had to the last time, we identified neighborhoods as really the only communities of interest in this city that were populous enough at this point in time to really, be used as a criteria. Are you suggesting that we just identify that there might be communities of interest and we should always, that the commission should always be cognizant of that and looking for them in enough, population numbers to be considered significant?
Thank you. Councilwoman Clegg. So I would look to the Idaho Code 72-15062, which talks about the preservation of communities of interest. Community of interest is a very vague term. It's intentionally vague because it can mean just about whatever you want it to mean. That could be in, let's say, in statewide redistricting, grouping counties together that have a shared financial interest in the dairy industry, or that could be Boise's refugee community, or it could mean the central bench and the west bench want to be put together because they have stronger interests than the central bench and the north end. I don't think it would be on staff or councils to identify communities of interest. That's for the public to come forth and say, hey, there's this geographic area that has some shared common interest that's significant enough that we want a stake in the political process that decides our new council member. So that can mean just about anything, but I think it's up to the public to be able to identify shared communities of interest and then advocate for those interests in a redistricting process.
Follow up, if I could. So you've noted that the state statute requires us to have equal population between the districts, or at least as much as we can within 5%. And as I understand communities of interest and the rulings on it over the years in the various courts, you still can't overlook the requirement of the equal population as you look to create districts. Is that also true in your understanding?
Madam Mayor and Councilwoman Clegg, I think we might be conflating two issues here. One is the creation of majority-minority districts, which there's a lot of case law on, and then the concept of communities of interest. Population requirements would always trump communities of interest because there's a constitutional argument there. I'll also point out that a communities of interest preservation argument is a very weak legal argument to challenge either a state or municipal redistricting plan. The reason for its inclusion, I would say, is more, it gives a hook for communities of interest to organize themselves and advocate on their behalf, and for the redistricting commission to consider their interests in their process. But it's a very weak legal case to be made that a plan could be thrown out for a violation of a community of interest.
Thank you. That clarifies my understanding, because that's what I was thinking as well.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming down, Representative Nash. My question is, we were planning on putting language about communities of interest in policy, which is forthcoming. What is the benefit of putting it in ordinance rather than policy?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councilwoman Woodings. If you do decide to take my advice, and with that inclusion of allowing for remand for a violation of the ordinance, then that would, if let's say the commission proposes some map and it really carves up some obvious community of interest in the city. Let's say the central bench is just cut 6 ways and it looks weird. People don't like it. They're distrustful of it. The city in that case would have recourse to remand the map back to the commission to say, hey, you've really gone too far in hurting this community of interest or this traditional neighborhood. Take another crack at it to get this right.
Excellent. Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Just so I understand what you're saying, though, the downside of that would be that this independent commission could be subject to remand from the city council under the standard that I think you said was vague if the council disagrees with the map. So you could have an independent commission that created districts based on the criteria in the law and feels they're right. And then the council, maybe a bunch of uppity self-centered North End people could decide that you violated a community of interest that's unspecified and remand it and influence the commission by saying, hey, do better, do better, do better until the council gets the map it wants. Isn't that the downside?
Mayor McLean and Councilmember Bajent, I think there's a balancing act here between preserving the independence of the commission and getting maps that are generally publicly favorable. And I think the city council can do that. I trust you all not to set up an independent commission only to swat down everything it does. At the same time, I think you can put heightened standards in there that, I don't know, you could say by a unanimous consent or 5 out of 6 of the city council has to agree that there's such an egregious violation of the community of interest standard that it should be remanded. I think there's stopgaps that you could put in place to protect the independence of the commission. But I still think it's an important criteria to allow the public to be able to weigh in on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now we've got Dave Kangas. Welcome.
Madam Mayor and Council, I'm Dave Kangas. Today, after 2 years and with only 5 days notice, we're finally here to be able to have the public in front of you to talk about redistricting. This ordinance on creating the commission is so integral foundation for the whole process that we really have to make sure we get it right so the whole thing isn't affected. Creating the commission districts, that's the first step. And I am not excited or pleased at all with the district map for the commissioners. When you have West Boise and Central Bench combined at 99 to 100,000 people and Northwest at 23,000 people, that's just absurd differences. It's not even close to being equitable. In my communication with Holly, I had mentioned that trying to use the neighborhood planning areas and divide it into 5 areas would be problematic, and it obviously is. Dividing it into 6 makes it a lot more equitable. You can split West Boise and Central Bench and become a lot closer. You can even probably work with the North End. If you're going to stick with 5, well, you should just combine everything north of the river at 63,000 people as one district. That makes more sense. And if you're at 6 and following the neighborhood planning areas, they don't really follow the current districts. So there's the risk of loyalty for the areas is really diminished. I mean, there's going to probably be some of that no matter what you do, even if you use the current districts. But creating 5 districts with this kind of population differential does not start this process right or correct in any equitable way. It's infuriating. I was angry when I saw that. I couldn't believe that he actually published it and want us to think that this is going to be a fair and equitable process moving forward with that. Creating the commissions or appointing the commissioners. Considering that neighborhood associations are such an integral part of this city and our governance, it would be nice to see that there was a certain number of commissioners appointed by neighborhood associations or names nominated by them, 3 and 3. I did just realize that the ordinance itself does not have a population variable when it creates the actual election districts. And there really should be some kind of percentage, 8 to 10%, from low to high. I'm not sure. I just don't remember seeing that in there when the final districts come out. But there should be something in there that equalizes the populations. This is just very important. We waited a long time to get here. I know some of you are not happy with the process, but it is here. It is state law. And I just hope that we can do the best process we can to make it equitable moving forward for the next 10 years. If you get any part of this wrong, it's going to tear the city apart. You're going to have a lot more anger than there, is now, I guess. So my big concern is the districts and the population variable, the commissioner districts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Question, Dave, thanks for coming. Good to see you. Is there an existing map that the city has that you would have preferred for us to use as far as establishing where these commissioners would be from? So, and the reason why I'm asking you this is that there's the idea of creating a map to create another map. And then there's got to be a process to create that map and to be done in an equitable or equal way, depending on how you want to word it. Is there an existing map that we use that you would have preferred us to take a look at as far as different types of areas around town?
No, as I mentioned with Holly, is neighborhood planning areas are really laid out along a lot of how we're geographically set up. So that is a good map, but dividing it 5 ways, the only way you can get to equitable populations is to start shredding the different planning areas, split them apart. You could just go to current districts and point commissioners per the districts. But I think that the current map with 5 is just completely inequitable in population representation. I mean, obviously at this stage, being, within 10% or something is not the goal, but from 23,000 to 100,000, that is just way off base, and it will cast a shadow over the whole thing.
Madam Mayor, quick follow-up there. And so I guess so the other thing I'm trying to understand here is you're using the term equitable, and I don't know if you're looking for equal or equitable, because equal would mean we'd have the exact same amount of people, but that might not be
equitable for the end process for everybody throughout the city. I mean, if
Dave,
if the people in the Northwest really, they have a 4 times say in what people in West Boise does because of the population, that's not equitable.
So Dave, let me finish really quick. What I'm trying to figure out here,
This and then be done.
when we're talking about it from an equitable standpoint, and we've got areas of the city geographically that don't feel represented. And if we do it 100% based off population, instead of areas that maybe feel unrepresented, to me, there's a definition of equitable that would include different populations and making sure that there was an area that had a commissioner in the process. And so that's what I'm trying to get here is there may be some different definitions. What I hear you asking for is equal and not necessarily equitable, equal in population.
Equal in
Thank you.
population in the commissioner district, so the outcome is equitable for all. How's that?
Any other questions? All right, thank you. So that's all who signed up. Are the rest of you here to talk? Great, come on up, sir. And then because you haven't signed up, I'm going to ask whoever comes up to give me your name and your address for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I did look at the agenda tonight on the city website. I didn't see a place to register. Or put my
Oh,
name
no,
in.
that's all right.
Okay.
There was just a piece of
right.
paper out front.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. My name is Steve Madden. I live at 1120 East Lewis Street, and I'm in the east end of Boise. And I'm here to speak about the formation of this commission for redistricting. I've heard a term used tonight about communities of interest. As far as I'm concerned, every community is a community of interest because whatever you folks say and do up here, we all have to live with. So we have an interest in what happens in this chamber. So I don't look at community of interest based on ethnicity or demographics or economics or how you work or where you live. Everybody is a community of interest in Boise. That's just my firm belief. I don't like to divide people up that way. As far as the using population as a way to group together these the districts for redistricting, my suggestion would be we have a very, very good, you asked about maps. We have a very good community association map. And around the town, I would like to take 2 or 3 of these neighborhood associations, group them together and let them appoint a citizen oversight representative to be on this committee so that the things that happen in the room, in the committee that are going to affect everybody in the city, have some input from the people who are going to be affected by it, not a group of 5 or 6 appointed people who might have a special interest of some sort and might be leaning towards one way or the other based on the decisions they make that may not be or may be in favor of the people who live in the city. For the last 10 years, the population of the city has grown quite a bit in different areas. I believe that those different areas where people live, regardless of how much money they make or what church they go to or what kind of job they have, they all need to be represented. Every voice in Boise needs to be represented by the city council. And this district, this redistricting committee is going to determine how those voices are heard within the city. And just for full disclosure, I was a city council candidate last year for District 5. My heartfelt desire was to give every person in the city of Boise a voice in the government. 50% plus 1 should not tell 49% plus minus 1 how they have to live. We don't live in a pure democracy. We live in a representative republic, a constitutional republic, and every person who lives in this city should have the opportunity, if they choose, to have a voice in what happens within the city limits of this town through their representatives. And I think this is what this process is about. Geographic representation in the city of Boise on this panel, I think, is critical.
Sir, your time's up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, no. Okay. You must testify. Sorry, I didn't realize you were walking to the camera. Come on up. And are the 2 of you in shirts with matching logos speaking? Nope. Okay. All right.
Good evening. Sorry, I was a little bit late tonight, so I did not
That's all right.
sign.
Yeah, that's fine.
But I'm Alexandria Danilovich. I live at 8566 West Thunder Mountain in Boise, Idaho, 83709. I've seen most of you before, so thank you. And I hate being here sometimes, but I need to raise my voice because I am in the area of impact. So everything that you guys do impacts me, but I have no voice. So this is my voice. And here I am this evening explaining that again tonight. With what I see on the maps for the commissioners, which by proxy are from you, correct? It doesn't make sense. Just like I had like something so prepared. It was so good. And everybody said everything I was going to say. So now I'm just kind of speaking off the cuff and I apologize. But with as Mr. Kangas said, the population doesn't make sense. And if we're going to do districts, we need to actually have a voice for everybody. As Mr. Madden also said, everybody deserves a voice, even those area of impact people. And if we can at least have somebody that is just north of us by a mile, who can we can actually try and make a voice for, it would just represent the city and this town better. We say we're nonpartisan. However, I'm sorry, we're partisan. And it's just unfortunate or it's not. I don't know yet, but from what I've seen so far, from just being impacted by the decisions you all have made without having a voice, it has been very much partisan. So if we can have a commission that is appointed, I know by you, but if we can have somehow the neighborhood associations, just like everybody said, be able to have a voice in that, that would, I think, represent the city a little bit more, and to be able to represent the populations a little bit more, because it's like almost 20, it's about 24,000 in the foothills to 100,000 across the bench area. Plus I don't know if you saw that map, if you can even throw that up there again, I don't know. I don't know if you saw west to South Boise, past like south of the airport. That's a big, huge district. That's humongous area. And some of these people over here don't want the same things that these people want over here. And so it just doesn't quite make sense, even geographically. So I'm done, but I agree with what everybody else said. I love that we have districts, but I just hope that everybody gets a voice. Thank you.
What up?
Hi.
You can pull it down if you want.
Down.
I always have to.
Second. My name's Teresa Vaughter. My address is 4211 West Fairmont Street, 83706. I wasn't planning on talking, but this was very interesting. So I did just want to make a couple comments that came to mind. One of them is, it would be great, maybe I missed this, if there were some sort of years of residency in Boise requirements for these commission members. Maybe, or even just say within Ada County, or you've lived in Boise for 3 of the last 5 years, if people have to move to Garden City occasionally or things like that. I think too, it's interesting the things people have talked about with making these areas of interest more similar and even with the population. But I think something that Councilmember Badgett brought up is also important to remember. Not everyone who lives in the same neighborhood has the same opinion or interests about everything. So that should, geography of where these commissioners come from is very important, but we don't want to necessarily take this approach of they're sort of like a puppet and it's automatically assumed what they'll support and what they won't with the lines. And just kind of one other thing to think about. I think it's great that we have the neighborhood associations, but also keep in mind some are more active than others. And there are people who are engaged with their neighbors and their kids' schools and their work and don't necessarily have a lot of free time to be involved in their neighborhood associations. So I just that's a caution I have of not getting too reliant on the neighborhood associations as being the only representatives of those parts of town. So that was all I had.
Thank you. I just want to make sure, were you here just to listen, or were you here for another item that we covered before you got here? Okay.
Just to listen. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else in the room? All right, now we will go to folks online. So you can go ahead and raise your little Zoom hands and the clerk will call through.
Madam Mayor, we now have one person online with their hand raised.
Okay.
Excuse me, now we have more as we're going through.
Sure.
But the first person that has been promoted is Richard Llewellyn.
Great.
Mr. Llewellyn, you should be able to speak.
Richard, we can't hear you. Oh, there you are.
There we go. There we go. Okay. Well, you can see me maybe too. Richard Llewellyn, 9170 Hill Road. And you can hear me. That's correct?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for this discussion. A lot of things I've been hearing, I think, are valid concerns. And I do want to recognize this is kind of a tough problem to kind of chicken and egg, get geographic representation before we have districts. But I do agree with some of the comments that, having this huge disparity in the sizes of these districts, or these planning areas is problematic. But I'd really like to talk about something else. I was reading through both the proposed ordinance and Idaho statute this afternoon.
Wait,
And it's-
I'm sorry, Richard. You said you
Yeah?
want to discuss something else. Are you here to
Well-
discuss this ordinance?
Yes,
Okay.
just not the actual planning districts.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So as I was reading through the proposed ordinance and statute, Idaho state statute, it struck me that there isn't really much leeway for creating these districts, that the definition is very strictly, in a kind of common sense way, operational. There are only those two constraints, right? Contiguous and existing election precincts, and that to the nearest extent possible, they will have the same number of voters or population, number of people. So in my mind, what that means is if this commission group comes up with a map and at a public hearing, then another individual of the public says, well, I've drawn a map that actually is more equal in population, then that just operationally shows that the one that the district commissioners came up with is not to the nearest extent possible containing the same number of people. So I think that's, in a way, that's kind of refreshing. If there is only one such solution, and there normally would only be one solution, there really all these other ideas aren't relevant. And, people are working on this. This is a software problem, right? It's an algorithmic problem. I just noticed that there was a new paper out coming from Harvard that would give you this optimal solution. But if you don't agree, and if the commission doesn't agree that this is just simply a matter of optimizing a problem, then I think it really should be, I agree with others, that in the ordinance, those other constraints that we're talking about should be made explicit. Because otherwise, I think you're going to leave yourselves up to a challenge legally, and also as to what is fair. So, and granted, that won't overcome the limits with the state statute, but at least we'd be explicit and clear about it. So maybe we should think about that. Thank you. My time's up.
Oh, thank you for self-regulating, Richard. I hadn't noticed that your time was up. All right. How many more do we have?
Madam Mayor, currently we have 2 additional people online, but only one person with their hand raised.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and take those, and then we'll take a quick break. Go ahead.
Mr. Kenneth Pigeon.
Hi, Ken, you're up.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
We can hear you.
Okay. My name is Ken Pigeon. I reside at 1829 Canal Street, 83705. I believe most of you, if not all of you, have received my written comments. I won't rehash those. I will be using the term commissioner areas. And the first thing I'd like to ask you to do, as I did in the written comment, is to defer the adoption of this, or at least put this proposed ordinance on hold right now, so we can have more public input, particularly with all the ideas and concerns and that have been raised this evening. Secondly, as to the population and geographic diversity, as I noted in my comments to you, there's other ways of coming up with that, such as using the neighborhood associations, grouping those together, using voter precincts, grouping those together. There's several other ways of doing that, perhaps merging the neighborhood associations into, say, northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast, that type of thing, to come up with population and geographic diversity. And as others have mentioned, there is an extreme difference between the highest and lowest of the population projections right now. So I would ask you to address that. As to Councilman Bajan's point about qualifications, I would suggest that the commissioners have, at least one of the commissioners have a legal background, another have a GIS background, neighborhood president, just an ordinary citizen, something of that nature, and we focus on the qualifications. And lastly, to Councilman Halliburton's point about the maps, the city does have an excellent GIS section. I think creation of new maps would be a fairly simple process. As one who's done that for about 9 years as a GIS person, I think it'd be pretty easy for the city to come up with some other maps. So that concludes my comments, and I'm prepared to stand for any questions. Thank you.
Any questions? All right. Anyone else?
No, Madam Mayor.
All right. And everybody here is testified? All right. I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. We've got some questions or one follow-up from staff when we come back before deliberation. We're going to take a 5-minute break. I've gotten some requests for a quick bio break. Alrighty, we are all back. I'm going to ask Hannah. I imagine that there's a couple questions for Hannah, and then you had an update based on one question that a council member had. Go ahead.
Sure. Do you want me to start with that? Sure. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just did confirm my understanding with city attorney that we can do this. There's no due process or property right in being appointed to the commission. So that's what makes it permissible.
Madam Mayor, I've got another one for Hannah. We've heard a lot about population discrepancies. Can you go through what each of the current map are in terms of the population?
Sure, Madam Mayor and Council Member Willits,
I'm just going to clarify. Do you mean the district map or our planning areas that we use for planning purposes?
Planning areas. So like West Boise with the West Bench.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Before Hannah addresses that, I'd like to kind of go through what my proposal is going to be in amending this ordinance before it comes to us on first reading. I don't have I forgot my notes, so I don't have the exact populations of this proposal in front of me, but I think it addresses some of the concerns. So what my proposal is going to be is that we have.
I'm just wondering, I'm sorry, what?
I have the numbers.
You do? And could you pull up just for me, because I'm a visual person too, just pull up the planning area map while we discuss this? If this is this related to planning areas? Okay.
Yep. Madam Mayor, I think it would help me give some context if you could have Hannah say what they currently are, and then we can compare. I think that would help just kind of follow the map, if you will.
Why don't you go ahead with your proposal?
Okay.
And then Hannah will be able to provide numbers.
Yep. So the proposal would be to keep it at 5 commissioners because after extensive debate, that's where we landed. But the commissioner districts would be the West Bench would be 1, the North and East End, Foothills and Northwest would be another. The Central Bench and Downtown would be another. The Southwest and Airport would remain the same, and Barber Valley and Southeast would remain the same.
Madam Mayor, so Councilmember Whitting, so I think I hear what you're saying, and I'm trying to follow along, is that you've basically carved up the West Bench, the Central Bench, and then made 3 with Northwest and Northeast.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And that got us a lot closer to parity between the various geographic areas.
So are the Northwest Hills and the Northeast Downtown combined then under this?
This proposal removes downtown from that and pairs it with the Central Bench.
Got it.
Which is still contiguous. And I don't know if you have populations for those.
I do.
Okay.
Madam Mayor and all council members, do you want me to tell you what this proposed map looks like population wise, and then what Councilmember Woodings is proposing? I have both.
Well, I think that since there's interest in understanding the numbers, I mean, this is an interesting thing because the other cities just said geographic diversity rather than trying to prescribe. I think it'd be best if the council president pro tem would like you to share numbers based on what you just proposed, if you have those.
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Because that's what you're proposing tonight in your motion, is that we do this. So why don't we have the numbers that council need to consider for a motion that it sounds like the council president pro tem is considering making?
Sure. Okay. So West Bench alone would be 77,769. The new North and East Ends, Foothills and Northwest combined would be 56,524. Central Bench and Downtown combined would be 50,988. Southwest and Airport combined would be 49,552. And Southeast and Barber Valley combined would be 42,636. So the top would be the 77, just over 77,000, and the smallest would be just under 43,000 with a few in between.
So Madam Mayor, I'm gonna,
the council president. Sorry, I'd heard her first and then you can go.
Thank you. So before we get too deep in the numbers, I guess I would just like to say I've been looking at the way other people do this, other places. And frankly, in none of them can I find geographic diversity or population equity in the commission. What I do find in the commission is a lot of restrictions on who can't serve. You can't serve if you've run for office for a certain amount of time, in some cases 8 years, much longer than 5. If you've lobbied, if you're a staff member, if you're a consultant, if you're a family member. So we have all of these restrictions on the people who can't serve for variety of reasons that they might have a biased interest. But I can't find anything that in other ordinances that talks about geographic diversity. I recognize that our other cities have done that, but I guess I'm asking you, Hannah, in your research, is it the qualifications of the people that get chosen with, one would hope, the trust of the community that these are people that will act unbiased, versus that we try to create some equal districts that I guess I'm worried then create a bias to represent that district in the map rather than a unbiased look at what's the best way to represent the city.
Madam Mayor and Council President, a couple of comments. One, in the conversations with Meridian and Nampa, and throughout, from the time the legislature started talking about this through the 21 session when we worked on potential clarifying legislation, there was a desire to try as much as possible to do similar processes. So that's sort of where the initial conversation came from. And in theirs, they also don't match up populations of their geographic guidelines for the mayor's appointments, but they do say, north of this street, west of that street. That's how they cut it up. In terms of your question about qualifications and trust from the community, I think that is most important. I think here we were attempting to put in place guidelines so that there was some level of diversity when it came to where in Boise these commissioners are coming from, but certainly that isn't the only or probably paramount thing that the mayor and council would likely consider when doing these appointments and approvals.
Thank you.
And I'm also going to ask if the council president pro tem would like to provide any answers as well, given that some of these are policy questions and she's been involved in the creation of this policy. Yeah. And if you all want to direct through her, I think you're happy to take questions directly to.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the geographic piece, one of the places that this came from was we were looking at ways to build a commission that did not rely on partisanship, that did not rely on many of the things that the state uses when they're establishing their commission. How can we do this in a way that represents Boise, that represents our citizens, and is fair to folks? And they feel like this is a commission that represents everyone. This is one of the ways that we decided to do that, and basing it on our already established geographic planning areas seemed to make sense. Originally, because we have 10 geographic planning areas and we were only having 5 commissioners, it made sense to just combine 2 geographic planning areas to make the districts. Turned out that that did not work in a contiguous way, particularly because the West Bench geographic planning area is so large in population. And so this proposal kind of takes that original intention. How do we create a process to select districting commissioners that represents all of Boise and kind of refines that process a little bit from what we had originally landed on. Honestly, it's been a huge challenge to come up with a way to select commissioners. There will be additional guidance and maybe prohibitions in the policy that follows up. But this was one thing that we felt strongly enough needed to be in ordinance so that going forward, it would be preserved.
Madam Mayor.
First, Councilmember Willetts and then Bajent.
Madam Mayor, I think it would help us, given that we heard over and over again from public testimony about the numbers, whether we like that or not, the numbers of the population and the wide geographic swath that these have, to have some comparison. So Hannah, could you please talk about what those numbers were prior to this new opportunity, this new map?
Right. So you're asking about the original
Yeah,
numbers.
I think it's
versus
important
the-
to be able
Yeah,
to
that's
compare.
great. Yeah.
Mhm.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Willetts. In the map that is up on the screen
Yep.
now in these combined areas, north, east ends and downtown comprise 36,119. Northwest and foothills are 29,274. Airport and Southwest, 49,552. West Bench and Central, 119,888, and Barber Valley and Southeast, 42,636.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
And Councilmember Willetts, good point. Thank you.
I guess I just wanted to, since we're kind of deliberating, just comment for hopefully everybody's benefit about this geographic issue and population issue. The district and commission they're not policymakers, and they're not city leaders, and they have no budget authority. They're not representing the people in that way. Their job is to draw a map that's fair to every voter in the city. That's narrow and technical. So I think, and I know other people disagree, that this obsession over where people live it's contrary to that. It sort of implies that you may have a better opinion about what's fair to every voter based on what neighborhood you live in. And I don't think that's right. So my concern is the way that geographic areas or planning areas function is to exclude people from being on the panel. So you can imagine the two most qualified, stellar, awesome district commissioners, people, national experts who happen to live in the same part of our city. They would not be permitted to serve on the panel together because the geographic areas give primacy to where people happen to live over what their actual skills and qualifications are. So I know we're going down this road to making sure that the body that draws the lines for the districts is geographically representative, but I just don't understand how geographic representation is relevant to the skill of drawing a fair map. And so if it were up to me, and I know we're going down this road, and we probably are headed down the road, but I see the focus on this as really distracting from the main goal that we want to have, which is real fairness. And so, if I were starting all over at the very beginning, I'd say we have one planning area, that's the city of Boise, and we look for the best people in it. So as we're thinking about how to slice these things up, I just see it causing more division. We argue over this one's bigger, this one's littler, this neighborhood's different. That's not relevant to drawing a fair map to voters.
All right, are there any further questions for staff or for Council President Pro Tem? Because I think that this conversation is properly had, but it might make sense to have a motion on the table.
Madam Mayor, I just want to give Councilmember Woodings an additional opportunity to tell us anything that we're not seeing in the current ordinance that will be addressed through policy. Is there anything you'd like to share with us on that?
Madam Mayor, I think I'll just put a motion on the table so that we can kind of discuss from there, if that makes sense.
And the last question, if I could.
Okay, but then, so I would actually consider council, if we're going to do your last question, the council member Willetts also had a last question. So I think that we ought to have a motion on the table, and then we'll get to both questions as part of that conversation.
I guess just
Okay, you want to do questions? All right, go ahead. So first council member Willetts and then council president. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the open mic question for Councilwoman Whittings, is there anything else you'd like to tell us that's going to be in policy that we may not see right away?
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, I totally misunderstood your question.
Anything else you want to tell us? Any additional information? Anything about how you went about this?
Well,
I'm giving you the open mic.
Right, thank you. And And there were some things, for example, that came from the public tonight that will be things that will be in policy, such as considering publicly submitted maps. Those things will be the things that come out of policy. I don't have like the full list of policy considerations, but Hannah does. So that's great. So for example, one of the things that came up a few times tonight was we need experts on this commission. This commission will also be staffed by experts, by an expert consultant, GIS consultants. So they will have that professional underpinning of support. This really is intended to be a citizen commission that's representing the interests of the people of Boise. So the districting plan requirements, a lot of that is laid out in state statute as far as you can only have deviations of a certain percentage between districts. So that'll all be laid out. One thing that did come up tonight from Councilmember Bajent, I believe, was the piece in the ordinance about in the event that the Boise districting plan must be updated before the next decennial census, I think is worth taking a closer look at. I think that there needs to be a threshold there, like only when an annexation results in population disparity between districts. So we may need to look at that piece a little bit too. So my intention tonight is to not send this to first reading until next week with some of those cleanups done and having a better version of this ordinance, taking into consideration a lot of the things that we heard tonight, taking into consideration some of the technical aspects that we've heard.
But so follow-up question for the newbie. So once it goes to first reading though, is it amendable? I mean, and because I know we won't have a public hearing on it again. So we'll see this, but it will be kind of on autopilot. So if there's things that need to be corrected, then what happens?
Madam Mayor, if the changes that we're considering tonight are substantial enough that we can't do a first reading and then amend. So that's why we'll make the amendments and then do a first reading. If there are minor adjustments in between first reading and third reading, those can be made. But if it's something substantial, it would have to go back to first reading. That's why we're trying to really get it dialed in, really nailed down before it goes to first reading. We're on a bit of a timeline here.
I have a follow-up, but I want to make sure that the council president gets her question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So one of the things I don't see in the ordinance nor on the list of policy, and frankly, I would think it probably deserves to be in the ordinance and not on the policy list, is a certain number of days that the map will be available to the public for review before a public hearing or before a vote. I trust that we will have a process that will give an adequate amount of time, but it seems like that's something we would want in the ordinance to ensure that people have adequate time to review the map before any hearing or vote is taken. The various ones I've seen as I've looked at other ordinances range from 7 to 30 days. I don't know what would be appropriate. I don't have a recommendation, but it just seems like we should set some minimum.
Madam Mayor, Councilwoman Woodings, could you talk a little bit about why you didn't go with the neighborhood association approach that we heard from public hearing? Give us some background on that.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willits, as was noted by one of our citizens here in the chamber, we have various neighborhood associations with various levels of engagement from their neighbors. So some, may have high levels of engagement, a lot of neighbors really taking part and making sure that their voice is heard through their neighborhood association. Other neighborhood associations have kind of leadership and not a lot of citizen input. And so we really looked to our geographic planning areas instead as a way to kind of see that we had that geographic representation. I would encourage, however, neighborhood associations to encourage neighbors to put their name in for this commission, nominate folks, and make sure that you have really good people who are applying to this commission, because it is important. And we want really good folks serving, so that we can make sure that citizens really have a lot of faith in the process.
Anything?
Sure, Madam Mayor.
I wasn't looking at you.
I've got her blocked. I'm sorry.
No, she's good.
Two things. I think this will be in your motion, but I was just really critical of the geographic thing a second ago. So I'll point out a couple of things that I like. First, 5-year before and after rule, I think is really important. It's not an ex post facto law. It's not a crime to not be on the commission. That's silly. But what's important is that the commission look and feel and remain independent. And you can't have people mucking around in making the rules while then also running to benefit or not benefit under those rules. So really strong supporter of the 5-year before and after separation with the council. I think that's really important. And then the second is the community interest piece that Representative Nash brought up. His suggestion was to put it in the code to provide that council can remand back to the commission based on failure to adequately consider or properly accommodate a community of interest. I don't think it belongs in the code. I do think it belongs in the policy. And the reason is because that standard is so vague and it's so open to interpretation, and giving the council an opportunity to say no to the work of an independent commission based on a vague standard really invites at least accusations of impropriety, maybe actual impropriety. I think it's for the same reason I really like the 5-year separation. It's too squishy, too hinky, too close together. So the representative is absolutely right. We need to be considering communities of interest, and it needs to be clear in the policy document. But I don't think the council should be allowed to veto a map based on what it happens to think the relevant community of interest is.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Bajent, I agree completely. I think it's such a sticky wicket when we start to get over prescriptive in ordinance. We can set forth in policy some things that cause less conflict in our final ratification of a map. And I think that that's the right and correct thing to do.
All right, no further questions at this time.
All right, then, Madam Mayor. Do I move
You
to?
know all of them now?
What's
the
that?
question. Can you be specific about what should be amended
I
now?
think I can be pretty specific about what needs to be amended. And I think I'd like to get that into the public record on what we want to amend. So Madam Mayor, I would like for this ordinance to come back next week for first reading with the following changes. That we change 21-16-3, Section B, to the geographic areas as outlined in earlier conversation: West Bench, North and East Ends, with the foothills and Northwest Boise, Central Bench in downtown, Southwest and Airport, and Barber Valley in Southeast Boise. In Section 2-16-5, Section C, subsection 2, with a threshold for the Boise districting plan being updated between decennial census. I don't know what section that is. Sorry, I lost my place. Section 2-16-7, districting procedure, subsection G, to update that the city council may remand the matter of the commission only upon a finding supported by substantial evidence that the Boise districting plan does not meet the criteria set forth in Idaho Code, Section 50-707A, or Boise City Code. And that completes my changes.
That's a
Second the
motion.
motion, but with a clarification.
Wait, first we need a second.
I second it.
Oh, you did, sure.
Uh,
You yield for clarification?
Yes.
Great.
Did you also include in there a time period to publish the map?
I did not. I believe that can be policy. I also have, because the Citizen Districting Commission will also be receiving public input. I feel that between that and policy, there will be adequate time for the citizens of Boise to see and respond to proposed maps. There is a requirement in the current ordinance that that it be published 10 days in advance as well, or notice 10 days in advance.
Madam Mayor, I have a clarification on the process then. So with Councilwoman Wooding's motion, this would then go to the first reading calendar next time, and there would not be the opportunity for a public hearing or to receive public input.
Right.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, and to respond to that, we would get in a situation where we're receiving constant public input. I think we've received amazing input. We've incorporated a lot of that input into an amended ordinance. And so that's kind of is what it is.
Madam Mayor. So thank you, Councilmember Woodings. I guess I would ask if you'd be interested in one amendment. Right now, it calls for the notice of a public hearing 10 days in advance, but it doesn't call that the map be published at the time of that public hearing. Maybe it can be in policy. I guess this is one I feel pretty strongly about because it's a public process. Should probably be in the ordinance.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to update my motion to also include that I'm not going to find the code section right now, that the map be published also 10 days in advance with the public notice.
It'd be 216(7)B.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Second.
Yes.
Good.
Okay.
All right. Further discussion?
Madam Mayor, I just want to say how cool I think that this process has been. In the past, often when we bring ordinances, they're already pretty neat and tidy by the time we bring them to this point. This one, I think, had significant interest, and rightfully so, because it's such a huge part of the democratic process in the city. We've been expecting and working on this for a very long time. We've wanted many of these things to be in state code, and that did not happen one year, much to our chagrin. And so it's really great to be here at this process with a lot of public interest, like people really care about this, and rightfully so. So thank you to everyone who's reached out, who's offered suggestions, and who's really cared enough to be here tonight. It really means a lot.
Madam Mayor. I'd like to make a few comments too, if I could. First of all, thank you, Council President Pro Tem Woodings, for the work that you put into this. Thank you, Hannah, and other staff for the hours of work put into trying to get this into state code earlier and then producing this ordinance. I would also like to voice support for the 5-year before and after rule. I think it's incredibly important that the commissioners not have an interest in the elective process, but have an interest in the process of creating districts that are equitable and fair, and to the extent possible, keep together communities of interest. So I also do support putting communities of interest in the policy. And in terms of the geographic representation and the question about neighborhoods, I'd just like to say, having served as a neighborhood president, I love neighborhood associations. I think they're wonderful for this city. I think they do a lot to help us do a lot of good work. But I would also say, echoing some comments by Councilmember Halliburton, that they don't necessarily equitably represent all of the citizens of the city of Boise. Most of the people who participate in neighborhood associations are people who have privilege, who have time who have the ability to participate, that doesn't necessarily equitably represent our citizens. And so that gets me to the geographic representation. I think we're arguing about the wrong thing. What we want are unbiased people to represent us on this commission to create a fair map. And quite frankly, with geographic representation, if the mayor or the people who apply or whoever want to gerrymander the system and put one kind of person, you can do that. Geographic representation doesn't necessarily equate to equitable representation on this commission. I'll be voting for this motion tonight because I think it's a compromise that I can live with. But I hope that the citizens will be mindful that what we want here are people who will, in an unbiased way, not biased to my neighborhood or your neighborhood, in an unbiased way, look at the population and the communities of interest around the city of Boise and create a map that provides equitable representation. To me, that's the most important thing we can get at tonight. And this is a compromise that I can live with. But I am concerned about some of the things I heard and what I think is represented by those, which I don't think I've, in my 30 years of participation in this city, ever seen. So thank you.
Madam Mayor, there's not a ton that I can add to what's already been said. I agree with everything that's been said. And I really do appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I appreciate Council Member Bajan's comment earlier, and now Council President Clegg's comment about the intention really here is to make sure that we have an unbiased process completely, that any way that we can possibly do it. I was concerned that we were going to have to figure out how can we create a map to create a map. And I think that that's a really big problem. I'm glad that we are able to use our geographic planning areas. And I do understand some of the concerns that were voiced. And I think Council Pro Tem Wooding's compromise of trying to rearrange and replace some of those does speak to some of those things. At the same time, I still think that the unbiased aspect doesn't matter where you live. We have to make sure that we are looking at this not from a geographical standpoint, but from a doing it right standpoint. And Councilmember Bajan said it perfectly. This is a technical issue. We need to approach it in a very, very technical way. And so I do appreciate that we're doing that. And I appreciate that everybody has come here to comment tonight. I also think that we do have experts all over the city who can provide wonderful comments in any type of areas that there are. And I'm confident we'll find very, very qualified people in the areas that you outlined.
Madam Mayor, a few comments. First of all, I'd like to thank Councilwoman Woodings and the staff for all that you've done. This is hard. Everything about it is hard. And I appreciate you doing it. And I appreciate you taking the feedback. I think it's really important. I appreciate, combining some of these areas so there is more equality in terms of the numbers. I think they were pretty egregious before. I think this is much better. There's never been a time where elections are being watched more closely than they ever have. And that begins with how you draw a map. And people are suspect of a lot of things. And I think we need to honor concerns and address them head on, so that people feel comfortable from the beginning of the process. I'm going to offer a different view when it comes to geographic diversity. I think it's important. I think it challenges inherent bias. I think when you get out of your neighborhood and you get to see more things about a city, but it also helps to know what your life is like within that part of the city. And I think we've done a better job of addressing that. I think it's important for this council to be united on this, but I have a burr on this, and I know that it would slow it down, but I really do think we need another opportunity for folks to give public comment before we take this to a first reading. I understand that it would pause it for a minute, and there might be some concern about, we're arguing about people who are going to create a map, but I do think that the more open we can make this, the more opportunity we have for public comment, the stronger this will be. It helps us build some bridges here, and it helps people feel more comfortable with what they're saying. I know that that's that's not in the motion, but I do believe that that's a better process and a better transparent process. It's not our normal process, but I think in this case, there's nothing normal about this. It's totally new. So, so without the opportunity to have another public discourse on this, I'm going to be voting no.
Councilmember, anything further? Clerk, will you call the roll?
Woodings.
Yes.
Agent. Clegg.
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
Willetts.
No.
4 in favor, 1 opposed, motion carries.
Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. And for those of you that are online, still online, thanks for coming. I got to make sure. I think that was the only thing. Yep, there's nothing else on the agenda.
Madam Mayor, I move we adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Have a good night, everybody.